Good morning, good afternoon. It's like almost 1 p.m. I'm sitting outside in the yard again by the pond, reflecting on things, reflecting on life. And I just wanted to say a little bit, tell you a little bit about my story and like why I feel so passionate about equality and why I feel passionate about peace of mind and a lot of things that have happened to me that I feel have impacted the way that I look at life and the way that I kind of function. So let's go back to my parents. Let's go back to my childhood and why. Another reason why I say this is because I want to talk about how my childhood trauma has affected my life and how you can change your story and live a much healthier life when you choose to do so. So when I was younger, my mother and father got married when I was like when they were 23, 24. Then they had my sister, and then they had me. My mom was it was an exceptionally bright woman, and I struggled honestly a lot of my life feeling smart because my grandparents and other people would unconsciously compare my my intelligence to my mother's, and I always felt like insecure about that. But now that I'm older, I don't really feel as insecure about that because I see too many people who are really smart but still don't know what to do with their lives. And my father is a musician. I mean, he's a musical person. He has toured the country before. I mean, he's a drummer. Now he plays. I mean, he's a nurse to make more money that's consistent. But he was touring, and he's done a lot of things. And so, my mother and father are both very musical and very creative, talented, artsy people. So they met each other, whirlwind of a romance. My mother gets pregnant with my sister, but then my mom had a lot of mental issues where she was bipolar and struggled with, bouts of being manic and depression and all that. And my father didn't know that, didn't know it was that bad, and she didn't take her medication all the time. And so what ended up happening is we lived with my mother and father lived with my grandparents, on my mother's side. And I don't know all the details of this, of course, but I know most of this and a lot of it. I'm sorry. And so they lived with my grandparents, and my grandparents tried my best to, be there for my mother and my father. But I think it was honestly very smothering. I mean, is that the word? Like very, like still my mother and father didn't have a chance to be a successful couple in many ways because of the fact that my grandparents took over, and they should have been married and enjoying themselves. See, there's the pond again back there. But yeah. So my parents got separated. I'm not going to make this very long. My parents got separated when I was maybe 5 or 6, and I think it was because they didn't have a chance to thrive in that really tiny apartment. And it was just it wasn't my grandparents' apartment wasn't tiny, but there were a lot of us. And my father also wanted to live his life, and I don't fault him for that now. I mean, he was young, and I don't know what I would do if I was in my early 20s either. I mean, it's younger than me, and I'm 26. But so then it was just my grandparents and myself living with my mom, and my dad was doing his own thing. And then for a long time I struggled to I would always look out the window to see if he was coming, and he would cancel all these different things. And finally I've made my peace with my father. It took a long time, but I finally did. So fast forward a little bit. My mom was a wonderful, wonderful mom. She was a beautiful, beautiful woman inside and out. A lot of men were attracted to her. She was very fun, very loving, very caring, but her mental health really took a toll on her. And then she kind of got into alcohol and did some drugs, and so not a good combination. Still very smart though, but just the mental illness really debilitated her in many ways. So the most impactful memory of mine with my mom was the year before she went missing. And the year before she went missing, in the nighttime, my mom took us actually on quite a few trips randomly in the middle of the night. And this is the one that really affected us, me and my sister, more, deeper than all the other trips that we took, because this is the one that we were actually taken to another part of the state, and where the year before my mother went missing. And so in the middle of the night, my, well, maybe about 11, because I think we took a train late at night. This is my memory, of course, from when I was younger. And my mother always made it very fun. And then we went to Urbana, Illinois, and we lived there. My grandparents didn't know that we left. I mean, my mother's friend Laura had to tell my grandparents that, hey, they're here, you know, they're safe, but they're here because Laura had a house out there. And that was a wonderful time. I mean, we were in Urbana. It's a countryside. I mean, Laura was great, and she loved us, you know, unconditionally, and we lived with her until my mother found an apartment, which I honestly don't even know how she paid for that. I mean, I guess she had some sort of money coming in. I'm not sure. But that's interesting now I think about that. Anyways, so we lived in Urbana, and that was one of the... I had been sexually molested before that. I was touched inappropriately by a girl, and my mother found out about it when I was probably 6, and then she took this lady in the room and told her, and then we didn't really see them again. That's why that connection was cut off. But that was when we were still in Chicago, and then I went to Urbana, and what ended up happening was my mom would sleep a lot throughout the day, a lot, and she would drink, and she would, you know, sometimes she'd be kind of irrational, and sometimes she would be verbally violent, but I still loved her but I made my own life when I was in Urbana. I would roam the countryside on my own, you know, go to different restaurants, you know, get up and dress my own self, cook my own breakfast, which was usually just ramen. And then the thing is, my sister ended up leaving Urbana to go back to Chicago for this program. My grandmother, I remember, came down for that, and she was so hesitant to leave me with my mom on my own. And I remember, like, being left by myself. That was the beginning of me and Nusette, like, kind of not being as close, because after that, I don't remember us ever being as close. And I mean, we are a lot closer now, but that was really hard. And so I went to Urbana, and yes, you know, my mother went to this place, and she was having drinks with this lady downstairs, and the daughter basically called me up, and, you know, her and the son, you know, did some things to me, and that was my first introduction to, like, my second introduction to being sexually, you know, molested, and being taught where my private parts are, and being told to do certain things to somebody, and blah blah. And I didn't tell my mother about it because what could she do? You know, like, it didn't feel wrong. It felt good, you know, but it was wrong. That's why you can't introduce kids to sex early on in an unhealthy way. Yeah. Yeah, give me like 20 minutes. Okay. Okay, that's fine. Yeah. So, yeah, so then what ended up happening was my grandmother took us on vacation one night. I was at somebody's house, and it was actually at this house that I had been molested at. And my grandmother came and picked us up, and she packed all of our stuff and didn't tell my mother that she was taking us back to Chicago. And sorry about that, by the way. And she took us on this vacation, and now I look back, my grandmother actually was planning on how she was going to take us back to there. What's up? Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, you're welcome. And my grandmother took us on vacation with my grandfather, and then we were back in Chicago again. And that's amazing. My grandparents are like the most amazing people. I mean, they have their imperfections, but they took us in. They knew something was wrong. Because they saw, you know, when we were living in Urbana, the house wasn't clean, the dishes weren't clean. I mean, the house was really nice that we were living in, but it just wasn't conducive living for a child. I mean, I was young. I was like 7. The more I think about it, I was really young. And, you know, after being molested twice, I kind of became very shy. And it's weird because when my grandparents and people tell me that I was... My mother specifically and my grandmother would say, you know, when you were on the train, and Miss Rochelle would say, when you were on the train and the bus, you would really like flaunt your stuff and be about. And I became very shy after I moved back to Chicago. So we moved back to Chicago. My mother gets an apartment on like Ardmore and Sheridan, and my grandparents live only a few blocks away, and they've lived there for a long time. And we're trying to see our mom, trying to stay with her, all this stuff, but she still wasn't the most healthy person to be around. Fast forward to September, and I'm keeping out a lot of things here because those things are not relevant, and honestly, you know, that's not a big part of my life. I mean, these are the bigger events that I'm saying to you. And so fast forward to September 1st, 2001, my mother goes missing. She goes to the Fireside Bar and Grill, and she makes a final phone call that she's coming home, and she never comes home. My mother's been missing for, since 2001. It's 2019 now, almost 20. She's been missing for 18 years, coming up on 18 years. And wow, that's a really long time. And I was 8 when she went missing. So I was forced to grow up at a really young age. I didn't have friends around me that their parents went missing. I didn't have friends around me that were raised by their grandparents, or that saw their parents being arrested in front of them as they were intoxicated, and that saw their grandparents being pinned down on the ground like my mother was going to kill my grandmother. I didn't have friends around me that dealt with that stuff, or that had like grandparents that hoarded a lot of stuff. And it just, now I think about it and I don't feel like too bad about it. I feel very strong, and I feel like that has helped me. But I really do think about life very differently than a lot of people around me. Like, when you deal with trauma from an early age, being sexually abused, and then having like your parents take your allowance from you so they can use drugs or whatever to buy alcohol. It leaves a mark on you. And I don't have the worst story out there. Trust me, I really don't. I know people that have gone through worse. But I understand from my story and from what I've gone through that life is very hard, and that you have to make the most of your life, and you have to live every day like it's your best life. And you have to eventually grow up and deal with the trauma that you've gone through. I could have been really messed up. Like, I could have been really, really messed up from not having a consistent father and not having a great mother, but I had my grandparents, and I had my church, and I had this wonderful community. And I also learned from a young age that I didn't want to live a life like my mother. I didn't want to live a life like my father. I didn't want to live a life where I was dissatisfied with the things that were happening with me, and that I felt like incomplete in some way. I want to be a complete person. I still do. And yes, even when I got older, I struggled with a lot of things like my weight, and like having, facial hair, and having all these different things, and not feeling pretty, and all these different, and not having somebody like my parent who I really looked for to tell me I was pretty and to tell me that I was, worthy, my actual parents. I didn't have that growing up. So I had to learn that as an adult. And I learned that really, and I'm going on this journey now to learn more about that. But I feel like this is the first year that I felt very, very secure in knowing who I am, and knowing like that I am a child of God, that I'm a child of love, that I don't have to keep settling for a life that's hard. Which is why when I go to my church specifically, I know that I don't have to waste my years in a church and keep fighting for a church and for people and against people that don't want the same things that I want, which is really peace and equality for all. Because I know what it's like to not have equality. I know what it's like to feel less. I know what it's like to be sexually abused. I know what it's like to have a past that other people don't relate to. I know what it's like to not have parents at certain events, because my grandmother didn't come to a lot of events when I was in school. My grandfather worked all the time, and I love them through it. But don't waste your life, and fix your trauma that you've gone through, because I have gone through a lot of shit. And if I could tell all of it from beginning to end, it would be very, very interesting. I'm giving you a quick synopsis, but it would be very interesting. But fix your life, deal with the trauma that's going on, that you have in your life, because it will mess you up if you don't deal with it. You will be looking for attention all the time, and you'll be looking for attention different ways, whether it is through your body, whether it is through your job, whether it is through your career, through school, whether it's through success, that you feel like you have to keep going and going for success. Look for inner peace. Look for like a life that you enjoy. Life is too short. It's too short. And I've spent already over a decade through trauma. And I've spent another almost 10 years dealing with what's been going on in my life. Because high school wasn't easy for me. I got really bad grades. I was depressed all the time. College the same. And if you're having a mental health issue, which usually, yes, some people are born mental health issues, but some people have situational depression or mental health issues where they have to deal with trauma that they've dealt with, usually that they've gone through that comes from a young age. So deal with that stuff, but don't let your story define you and damage you. And there are a lot of things that I wish I could have done differently, that I wish I've known, but I was really just trying my best. And honestly, I was just trying to survive in a lot of situations, and that instinct of survival kicks in, especially like when I was in Urbana cooking my breakfast while my mom was intoxicated. But you know, the story is a part of life, and you can make new chapters and make your life beautiful. And that's why I don't want a job that stresses me out. I don't want a life that stresses me out. I don't care about the titles. I don't care about any of that stuff. I just want a life of peace, because I've gone through too much stuff from a young age. And now that I'm older, I realize that my life is supposed to be beautiful, and I want to make it beautiful. So own your story, deal with your trauma, deal with your shit and all that baggage, and know that there are people out there that are there to support you. I will be there to support anybody who's gone through anything that wants to talk. And stop being a part of communities that are oppressing you, especially if you've gone through trauma. So that's a little bit about myself. I'll do a follow-up story of college and high school in the future, but that's a little bit about today. That's a little bit about me, a little bit about Cara. Have a wonderful day. Bye.